Hi, this is Scott Carmichael from Prodigy Search. Excited to have our inaugural Prodigy Search Presents interview series, and very, very excited to have with us currently the President and Chief Experience Officer of Fast Traffic Events and Entertainment, but a long, long time friend of mine. Spent time at Radio City, spent I think around 10 years, Frank, at the National Hockey League, where he and I became very good friends, and then clearly did a terrific job having moved over to the NFL and as their Senior Vice President of Events. I'll let Frank talk a little bit about it, but also Frank is a best-selling author of a book that if you haven't picked it up, you should. It's a phenomenal book, and it's what to do when things go wrong, and we're going to touch on that a little bit as well with Frank and some of the applicable aspects that are going on in our society. So Frank, welcome. Thank you for taking the time. As I said, you're our first guest, but given what we're dealing with in the world today, the country today, it's appropriate. So I just want to say thank you and welcome you to our inaugural presentation.
Great to be here with you, Scott. Unfortunately, talking about things that have gone wrong, and how we're dealing with them and how we could deal with things like that in the future. And guess what? It was actually 13 years at the NHL. Amazing.
13. I'm
13,
sorry, I did my research,
13 years. And then 10 for the NFL.
Wow. Well, I often will talk about my career, and it's not about me. And I look back and say I've been in the business 40 years, and I cringe when I say that because it makes me sound older than I feel. But I'll jump right into it. Frank, in your book, which was a very well done book, and I just got some tremendous people in there and some accolades. You know, in chapter 2, you spent a lot of time on preparing. And you know, one of the many chapters that are good there. And again, we talk about today and the pandemic and what we're faced with. How could you, I mean, again, it's not a pop-up event. We'll talk about Super Bowl 47 in a minute and how you dealt with that, which was a instantaneous kind of a pop-up crisis. So knowing that this isn't a pop-up, but you know, how do you, we were just talking before we started, you know, how do you deal with this? I mean, your career spent on putting thousands and entertaining thousands of people in facilities. Now they're talking about potentially and probably realistically playing games in empty facilities. Mm-hmm. You know, as you prepare, I'm not sure you can prepare for such a pandemic, but what are your thoughts in general on that?
You know, one of the things we talk about in the book is the need to prepare contingencies or imagine contingencies for just about anything that can happen. And what is really important about that sentence is the word anything. Not everything. You can't prepare for everything, but you can prepare for anything. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Mm-hmm. You may not have been able to predict a specific response to a pandemic. That's really, you know, when you're thinking about the projects that you work on, the events that I work on, the businesses that we run, it really isn't about figuring out how to prepare for a pandemic or a war or civil disobedience or whatever. Think about the things that are common to all of those types of events. You might have had a business interruption and you can't get to your offices. Mm-hmm. Well, we're dealing with that right now. There's a lot of things still sitting on my desk in an office that's 30 miles away and in Midtown Manhattan or Lower Manhattan. So you know, well, what would we do if we couldn't use our offices, if we couldn't get to our offices, if we ran out of cash, if the places that we are launching projects, events, or whatever, that facility was not available to us. If our contractors are unable to function, you know, having a deeper bench of contractors available to do things and not think about only one contractor doing a particular job all the time. Those kinds of things, if you have plans for those kinds of things, that prepares you for an anything instead of an everything kind of a philosophy.
Well, and again, we'll talk about a little bit because you did something on the fly, but again, it's being prepared and understanding. Going back for a moment, and more just your opinion, Frank, because of your tremendous career and what you've done and the events you've put on, I'd love to get your thought on resuming sport, which everybody's clamoring for. They're talking about it daily, from the president to the governors to the mayors.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks inevitably that sport will come back, which is great. It's, kind of always been our healing process in our humanity to an extent, TV. But I can't fathom it playing in empty stadiums, empty arenas, empty concert halls. I know WWE had their WrestleMania, I guess, 2 weeks ago in a studio. I did not see it. I talked to my son-in-law, who's a big fan, and said it was so odd. And that WWE feeds so much off the crowd
Mm-hmm.
to have that. I'd love to know, from your perspective as an events professional, from all aspects, security and flow and egress and so forth, but also from having a team of game presentation people. How would you, so the green light goes, sooner than later here, and in NFL, the Jets play at MetLife in an empty stadium. How do you, as a professional, plan, choreograph, execute that?
I don't think we're going to get a green light. I think we're going to get a yellow. It's going to be proceed with caution, right? Right now we've got a big red light. There's a whole lot of things that are not normal today. And you talked about WWE and UFC is following suit. NASCAR and IndyCar have done iRacing. I've actually watched it. You're watching the actual race car drivers doing a video game, and you're watching it. And in fact, when it comes to esports, I mean, this is kind of the killer app for them, right? It's all about, video games and things like that, the things that you can do electronically if you can't do them physically. There's no question in my mind that there's going to be games without people in the stadium. It's something that I saw coming even before this all came down to where it was just a full stop. The question of being able to do these things in neutral sites right now is something that I know the NHL's looking at. I know that baseball has been looking at, basketball's been looking at, where they pick 1, 2, or 3 cities and they say, well, these are the places we're going to do these things, and we'll put all the players in hotels and whatnot. Whether it's Saskatoon or Grand Forks, North Dakota, wherever it is, and it scares the crap out of me because it's the petri dish effect, right? Right now you've got teams in 30, 32 places. Now you're going to put them all in one place. All you need is one asymptomatic dishwasher in the hotel, and suddenly you've got an outbreak that really threatens the health of everybody in the league.
And then you shut it, and then you have to deal with that, Frank, and then you shut it back down.
Well, yeah, you do, but in that particular case, you're shutting down all 30 teams that are in one place, or all 32, and that to me is really frightening. And then you've got a medical issue that has to be dealt with in mass with professional athletes. To me, I don't think that's worth the risk. I think you either do them in the stadiums and arenas or you don't. Now, with respect to how you do that, you're right. It'll be weird. But what we're looking at right now is weird. So, this is a little bit less weird, I think.
Become our new norm in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, we watch sports. More people watch sports on television than watch them in the stadiums and arenas, and they'll do that again. I don't think you should try to make it something it isn't. I don't think broadcasters should digitally insert crowds. I don't think that they should pump in sound. I don't think they should do any of that. One of the things that is kind of interesting that you have the opportunity to do now that you haven't in the past is the notion of actually miking the players or miking the ice, or miking the court, and really hearing the sounds of the game as though you're an audience of one.
Wow, that's a great thought.
And I think that could be kind of interesting. You started to hear or see some of that with the XFL. It's how you, if you've ever been on the sidelines, and I know you have, on the sidelines of the basketball court, right on the pane. Yeah. Or if you've been in the penalty bench or timekeeper's bench in a hockey arena, what that sound and feel is something that's very, very different. You also have the ability to change camera angles a little bit more because you don't have people in your way. You don't have the audience in your
Great
mind.
thoughts.
You
Yeah.
know, so I would look at it as an opportunity to be innovative from a broadcasting perspective, from a live event perspective. You know, it guts the kinds of businesses that I'm in for sure, because you're not going to do pregame shows as much. You're not going to, because you don't have people in the arena to take care of an hour before the game starts. You don't have people that you have to entertain during intermissions and things like that. Eventually, you're going to start seeing people come back to arenas and stadiums. The business model mandates that. You know, you can't make these businesses go.
Right.
Football's a little different because you've got these multi-billion-dollar television contracts. Most of the leagues are really dependent, the teams are dependent on the concessions revenue, the merchandise revenue, and certainly the ticket revenue. And so eventually there's going to be a rescaling, I think, of the economics. And there might even be, if this goes on for a while, there might even be a reduction in the number of games, because you know you're and then a reduction in salaries and
Well, that's what I'm saying, because
things of that nature.
you know this as well as anybody. You got players who, in their collective bargaining agreements, and where there's a percent of revenue shared by the players and the owners, and all of a sudden those revenues are now lower. What does that do? I mean, again, there's so many domino effects here. Does that do to economics of player salaries, and thus reduction in games and so forth?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be part of the negotiation, and we've seen that already internationally. In Australia, in Europe, there are renegotiations of how much players are going to be paid, because the number of games are going to be seriously affected. Uh, and I think that's reasonable. It's just like you and I, if we're not working and we're not getting paid, or we need to take a 50% cut of our salary, you know, the athlete has to also be open to that notion, or you have no business. You know, you're
Yeah.
talking about huge multiples, you know, millions of dollars in player salaries individually even. So that's one thing. The thing that I'm really the most concerned about is the possibility that the economics will drive bad decision making in terms of letting people back into stadiums and arenas
Yeah.
too quickly and too,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
too early. And then we'll be right back where we are right now. That, you know, you want to make sure that the science has the time to catch up. Vaccines, testing, tracing, all of the things that are being talked about today. That's going to be enormously important. Stadiums are not controllable. Even if you said, well, we're only going to sell 50% of the seats, and it's going to be every other row. How do people get up the row, up the aisle? Are they going to maintain 6 feet of distance? No, they're not. What about the lines in the bathroom, the lines at the concessions? You know, okay, people are going to be mandated to wear face masks. That's terrific. What about the people who go and buy a hot dog and a beer? They're going to take their face mask off, and after a couple of beers, or maybe more than after a couple of beers, people start to not think as clearly about physical spacing, right? That's, you know,
I find
people.
that going in the store now, as little as I go in, it's so
Well, that's
consciously.
without the beer. That's without the beer.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
beer is part of that thing. Are you going to be able to police tailgating in the parking lots? You know, are you going to be able to keep people away from one another?
Yeah.
I don't see how you do that. Um, you know, concerts, same thing. You know, when everybody wants to be, especially standing concerts, everybody wants to be in the front of the stage, right? You take a 6,000 person venue, standing venue. I work with one in Manhattan. It's 3,400 people. If you said, okay, we're only going to sell 1,000 tickets, all 1,000 of those people are going to be pressed up against the stage.
Yeah.
You can't keep them apart. So you know, the question of whether the economics start to drive bad decision making is something that's really uppermost in my mind.
Have you had, Frank, any discussions with any leagues or teams early on at this stage to the exact, issues you're describing? Is that have you had either some of your clients, potential clients, consulting calls? Just curious.
Yeah, informally, we've chatted about it, and everybody's grappling with the same issues.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to figure out where their responsibility begins and ends. Some arenas, stadiums have big plazas outside their buildings. Do they activate those? Do they keep people moving, through there? What about these security checkpoints? Post 9/11 and certainly post Boston Marathon, there have been, more and more focuses on security. Magnetometers, things like that. Magnetometers, think about it. Magnetometers, wanding, bag checks, all of that. That is all very close and personal in terms of physical space. You're not going to let your guard down from a security perspective.
Right.
So if that's the case, are you going to put a rope line together where you've got a knot every 6 feet? it just becomes really hard to imagine
That's
how
where you think
you deal
God
with these
forbid,
mass events.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Frank, but God forbid, because you and I and thousands of others rely on live sporting events.
Mm-hmm.
Us as recruiters, in terms of putting staff together who manage and sell against and so forth and so on, is that I've heard some people say, is it no mass gatherings unless there's a vaccine for the COVID-19. And you hear scientists talk about that's 12, 18 months away. So that's almost unfathomable to think that the industry of sport and entertainment perhaps can be playing and reinventing themselves over the next year and a half without people in the stands, and become purely a media-only entity.
Since this all started, my imagination's gotten a lot better. You couldn't imagine where we are today.
Right.
Well, we're imagining it today. We're living it today. So I can imagine an awful lot after that. Nothing's off the table. I look back even at the history of this and the pandemic of even 1918, where there was a real reticence to close down sports events. And baseball was played with face masks and things like that. I mean, there's some really remarkable photos and stories about it.
Okay.
And that was back before anybody really understood what a virus was and how diseases were transmitted. Well, we know what it is now, and we know how it's transmitted, and we know that this one is really insidious and incredibly contagious. So there's the question right now, the push and the pull of people wanting to get back to work, people wanting to see the economy take off again. There's the pull of the medical community trying to manage this, and the whole question of herd immunity. At what point do we find out? Because we haven't had widespread testing. We've only had testing of the people who are most acutely affected. When you test the entire population, it could well be that 50% of us are immune for whatever reason, right? We've been exposed to it. Our antibodies were already produced. We find, and we haven't yet determined, that you can't get it once you've developed the antibodies for it, but that's not known at this point. So there's all kinds of questions that still need to be answered. And sports is a great healer, but it can't be the first thing that you do in response to this crisis.
Well, that's the scary part. Everybody wants to get, from leadership of the country on down, the economy back, kick-started, but let's not have this continue to be a vicious circle. So a lot to be discussed there, Frank, but I want to talk about some other your experiences, because we could go on, and justly so, on this topic for hours, but talk about challenges. And we talked about briefly, and clearly you talked about it very extensively in your book. Super Bowl 47 was well documented. You had the power outage. Was it just started the third quarter? I think it was, if I'm
That's
not
right.
mistaken. I'd love to know, and you've told the story before. I know there was a tremendous 60 Minutes piece on it that you were involved with, but I'd love to get just to talk about reacting and preparing for the inevitable. And you guys did a phenomenal job in what was a 20-minute or so delay in what became a blacked out stadium. Love to know just how you dealt with that, the issues that came out of that, and just some of the heroic work that you and your team did.
Well, I would say that the team did the heroic work. All I did was really watch them do that and let them do their jobs. The fact was that we were able to restore power in less than 20 minutes. The lights were back up in 24 minutes. We didn't actually start the game again for 34 minutes, and that is, I think, where where we probably applied the best thinking. Number one, don't panic. Something happens, you feel that panic deep inside. Don't start to take that energy, that panic, and direct it toward not feeling panic anymore. Trying to solve the problem. And psychologists have actually determined that if you do that, you start to feel a whole lot better and a whole lot more control when you're actually acting on handling the problem. And if you can solve the problem, solve it. If you can't solve the problem, you'll have to manage the outcome.
Hey, is that a
So you're doing one or
personality?
the other.
Not to interrupt you, but is that a trained thought, a trained mindset? Is that
Yeah, to some degree. And I'll tell you to what degree that really is. It's not because I'm not a worrywart, and because I am. I'm just OCD when it comes to being concerned about details and worry and all of that.
that's why you're successful at what you've done?
Yeah, but here's what was really the most important learning coming out of it. Every Super Bowl, for the 9 that I managed directly, we instituted a game day simulation. It was an operational rehearsal. We called it a tabletop exercise. We would hire a facilitator. I do a lot of that kind of work now for clients, where you hire a facilitator who becomes familiar with your plan and how you're going to operate and what you're going to do and how you're going to manage. And for 4 hours in a locked room, cell phones off, he would throw these scenarios at us and we would have to solve them. And it was actually, that was more nerve-wracking than anything, right? Because you've got crazy scenarios, crazy scenarios coming at you. It's really a prepare for anything, not everything exercise, because you're starting to learn about the problems in your plan, the faults in your plan, but you're also starting to make decisions as a group. Everybody who's got a decision-making responsibility on game day was included in that.
Yeah.
And we would knock down 4 or 5 of these things a year. So when the lights went off, we immediately, as a group, went into problem-solving mode, just like we did the week before. So it was trained in the sense that it was a rehearsal for that. We had done that. We had solved a bunch of problems that were similar. We had never been offered a simulation of a power failure. Never.
Yeah.
But again, prepare for anything, not everything. We said, okay, well, let's take this apart. What do we have to do? Send somebody to find out what's going on with the power. But what's also important is, what do we tell people? You've got 78,000 people at the Superdome. They're going to want to know what's going on. The lights went out. Do you tell them to stay in place? Do you tell them to leave? If you tell them to leave, your game is done. Your event is done. Super Bowl's finished. If you tell them to stay, you don't want to put them in any danger. So let's find out if they're in any danger. If they're not in any danger, then have them stay here. Now, how do you tell them to stay here? The power is out. we had to get a script. We hand wrote a script for the public address announcer. The public address announcer was on a different floor. We sent somebody down the staircase, a dark staircase, to give him the script. It basically said, to stay in place, that we're working on restoring power shortly. Luckily, most stadiums and arenas in the United States have a battery backup for life safety purposes, for just this reason, that you can use the public address system for about 20 or 30 minutes before the batteries give out.
Right.
So we had the ability to talk to people. When we started to get power back, we put a message up on the screen. We were looking at social media. What were people saying? What were people saying outside the building? What were people saying inside the building? We were trying to respond to all of that. And within 4 or 5 minutes we had been doing that, we determined what had happened. We had the ability, through the engineers that were working on it, to restore power. And then, when the lights came back on, the amount of pressure we were receiving from the broadcaster, for example, saying, "Hey, 115 million people are watching.
Yeah.
We've got to get back on. We've got to get back on the tee up the ball and let's kick off," because it actually happened right after a touchdown, minute and 38 seconds into the second half. And I said, you know what? Let's not do that. What else do we need to make sure is up and running that would have been affected by the power? Is there any equipment that got destroyed in a power spike or anything like that? Is there anything that needs to be rebooted that isn't rebooted? Do we have a score clock? Do we have instant replay? Do we have the coach to quarterback system? I didn't know all the systems.
And I say, you're just rattling that off, Frank.
No, I'm doing it now. I looked around the room and I said, what do you need?
Okay.
What systems do you need to get this back going?
Okay.
And football operations and officiating were up there, as well as broadcast and security and PR and everybody else. And we went, and I said, we're not going to get started again until I know everything's up and running. And that's what the 10 minutes was for. And actually, in point of fact, one of the coach to quarterback systems was not working.
Oh, really?
So we were able to restore it and get it back up and running. The moral of that story is, and this is about responding instead of reacting.
Right.
Reacting is tee up the ball, let's go.
Okay.
If the instant replay system wasn't working and there was a controversial call, the official goes under the hood and he can't get to instant replay. Now you've got a different story. Now you've got a conspiracy theory that would be rampant. There's already one. But now there's evidence, circumstantial though it might be, that there's no instant replay. How about the stories that are, who decided to get this going again before there's instant replay, right? It's the Super Bowl. It's the most important game of the year. What's another 10 minutes if you got to get it right? And that's what we did.
And we're getting a ton of pressure from the network, Frank. You talked about that. I mean, clearly, 150 million people, obviously myself included, home watching, wondering when it's going to kick off. 20 minutes, 25 minutes now, 30 minutes now. I mean, you must have been getting pressure.
Pressure, yes. Yeah, pressure, yes. Ton, no. I would say that, they knew that we were still trying to get all the plugs back in the wall, and they wanted to get started right away. And when we said, no, that's not happening, they just wanted to know when. They just wanted a time frame. Could you give us 3 minutes? And I remember that. He said, could you give us 3 minutes so that we know?
A 3-minute warning?
It was 3 minutes. I think they wanted to get another commercial in, maybe even, but it would get them back.
Right.
We were also communicating with the sidelines, because the teams wanted to know what they should be doing. There was an awful lot of detail to all of that, but so the pressure was there, absolutely. There were 2 Harbaughs on the sidelines as coaches, and one of the Harbaughs was really animated and wanted to get going. Yeah. And I think he was the one whose coach to quarterback system was actually working.
Interesting. Again, we could go on, Frank. That's fascinating. Again, you talk a lot about it in your book. You talked a lot about the 60-minute segment that I watched, which is a handful of years ago now, I guess. But a testament to your preparedness. That may answer the question I was going to ask now, is that what was your most challenging event you've ever produced? And, I don't know how to get any bigger or more challenging than that. Was there any other event over your career, whether it be Radio City, NHL, NFL? I know you had your own business, I think, between Radio City and the NHL. Is there anything else that, I guess it couldn't match that, but that stands out?
There's something that goes wrong at every event you do, if you do an event of any size, because the probability is just that some detail somewhere is just going to go sideways, and they always do. And so it's just a question of what the size of those challenges are and how many and how noticeable. And Super Bowl 47 was not the most challenging. It was challenging for 34 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
It was very challenging, but we were able to get the game going again. I would say that the most nervous I was not during the blackout itself, but during the second half, because as we kicked the ball off, I said to no one in particular, but everybody in the room, please tell me this isn't going to happen again,
Yeah.
in the second half. And the general manager of the building said, I can't tell you that. So I was just praying for a very, very quick end to the game. Keep the ball on the ground. Don't stop the clock.
Yeah.
Keep this thing going. And it turned out that there was a real threat, which we didn't know until much, much later after the investigation, that there was a real possibility and probability, had we not handled things and the building had not handled things the way they did so capably, that the other side of the building would have gone out again.
Wow.
And so we escaped that. But the most challenging was really Super Bowl 45, where in Arlington, Texas, where we had unfinished construction in the building. We had weather that knocked out the highways and businesses for a week. In North Texas, they don't have the equipment to be able to handle that. It's very unusual for a deep freeze to stay in North Texas. You usually get it and then it goes. We had 2 storms in the course of a week. We had 40% of our gates that were unusable due to damage. And so that was the most challenging. And frankly, so many of those things were not solvable that you're really left to manage those things. So at some point you stop trying to solve the problem because it's not solvable, and you flip to, all right, how do I manage the outcome, and how do I make it, how do I get it to the point where it's as good as it can be, and that you can restore faith in the brand, and most of all, safety. Safety's not negotiable. That's the first thing you think about. And a lot of the decisions we made that day were based on safety and not on convenience. A lot of people were inconvenienced and very upset and very unhappy. And, we made decisions on the basis of safety and health first. And that's that. I'll make that decision every week.
Well, and good for you. And we talked about that at the outset too, right? In terms of where we are today and health, safety, overriding, getting everybody in a stadium. So, good for you. And that, I'm sure that is preeminent in every one of your planning and decision makings and event productions. What about, and I'm looking at the clock because we're 30 minutes in, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. What about your most successful in short, what are you most proud of? You look at any of the events you've produced throughout the years, and I want to have you touch in a minute on what you're doing now and some of the clients you're doing now with Fast Traffic. But what would be if you look at, this is what you're most proud of, and granted, you've done a ton of big events.
And a lot of that has nothing to do with what role I played in them. They had to do with what those events were, and just being associated with them. One was the reopening of Superdome after Hurricane Katrina,
right.
And that game was actually just rebroadcast, recently. It was a remarkable night. Nobody had expected that the Superdome would be able to host a game again as quickly as it did. It was almost a year, but the damage had been so dramatic, and the city had been so crippled. That was the first night that I think people in New Orleans, and I've heard this from more than one leader in New Orleans, where New Orleans felt like everything was going to be okay, that the city was going to come back and people would come back to it. So the reopening of the Dome, and you may remember it, what was on television on ESPN was a pregame show with U2 and Green Day, and it was really remarkable. And then of course you had an incredible game, and Steve Gleason was was a big part of, and we still think about that. But we opened up the plaza outside the Dome. We put the Goo Goo Dolls out there for a free concert. So whether you had a ticket to the game or you didn't have a ticket to the game, we invited the whole city to come down and just enjoy this incredible festival and play, have the Goo Goo Dolls play Better Days outside the building. It was really cool. If I had to pick one, that'd be the one. But I can pick so many more. The 100th running of the Indy 500, we've been at Fast Traffic. We've been producing the pre-race show for the last several years, and introducing a new way of staging the pre-race show at the Indy 500 was something that was really transformational for me, because I had never worked in motorsports before, and here you're dealing with probably the biggest motorsport event in 100 years, at least, as far as the speedway's going. And won Sports Business Journal's award for best sports event of the year. I couldn't actually go to the banquet because the 101st Indy 500 was the same week as the banquet. Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to participate in it, but that was a great experience too, and we brought a tremendous amount of pride and attention and a reinvigorated fan base back to Indianapolis Motor Speedway after that, and we've been producing that event ever since.
Frank, I've known you for many years. You're as humble as anybody I know. You've had your hands on some of the most iconic, largest, biggest events within the sports and entertainment industry. You're always giving credit to others and not to yourself, and that's just what makes you so magnanimous in my mind. And I don't say that gratuitously. I say that with all sincerity. You're a class act. And you've touched a lot more than we've allowed you the time to talk about. Tell me real quick before we wrap up, tell me what you're doing now. Tell everybody else that may be watching Fast Traffic Events and Entertainment. It's 6 years now, I think, the short of 6 years after you left the NFL. Tell me some of your clients and some of the work you're doing.
What's really been fun about it is we're spackle for events. We fill a lot of cracks and holes and work on a lot of different things. Not all of them are producing and managing events themselves, which is what I love to do, but I also love to be able to be the strategist behind new projects, help develop business plans, operation plans, and strategic plans. One of the most fun has been the rooftop at Pier 17 at the South Street Seaport, which we've been working with the Seaport Howard Hughes Corporation for the last 6 years. And we helped design the technical plan, the operating plan and the business plan for this amazing concert venue on the roof of a building that's 3 blocks south of the Brooklyn Bridge, sticking out into the East River. Yeah. And in the first year and a half, they had already hosted over 60 concerts. So it really transformed the Seaport from a tourist destination to something that is really fun and cool and engaging, and people are coming from really not just all over the world, because they always did that, but what's really neat is New Yorkers are coming back, and finding it to be a cool place to be. It's also where ESPN broadcasts every morning. They're on the 3rd floor of a 4-story building, and we're up on the roof, doing concerts and events. So that's been great fun. We've also done that kind of work for an NBA team, Milwaukee Bucks, when they built their new arena and decided to have an entertainment district across the street, a big plaza outside. We helped them develop their business plan for how to monetize and develop and design that plaza. So that's been fun. So a lot of consulting, a lot of strategic work, and a fair amount of event production too. So it's been great fun to get involved wherever our clients need us to be.
And where's your web? Tell people that are watching your website so they have the privilege to not only see your work but also get in touch with you.
Yeah, it's fasttrafficevents.com. And there's of course a contact tab as any good website would have. So if you need to find us, want to talk to us, just hit that tab, and you can see what we've been doing for various clients and some of the fun we've been having over the last 6
And
years.
don't forget Frank's book, bestseller, The Light's Hitting It, but what to do when things go wrong. And I encourage everybody to pick that up. It's a tremendous read about how Frank has dealt with many and prepared for many events throughout the years. Frank, I can't thank you enough for your time.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
We talked forever about the current situation we're in now, and the intricacies of putting on and relaunching sport. But I do appreciate your time, and I look forward to staying in close touch and speaking again very soon.
All the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, do what you have to do to stay that way, okay?